again, this is Ben Hitchcock cross talking to you today with Debbie Keither. We are going to go over the new proposed student bullying policy for Milwaukee Public Schools. There is an upcoming meeting for the school board to discuss this proposed change in the policy, right?
Yes, March 21st at 5:30.
Okay, what day of the week is that?
That's a Tuesday.
Tuesday, okay. And this is in person now, right?
You can be in person, so you can go to Central Service Building, or you can also sign on to do virtual testimony. And you can just watch as well, but if people are interested in actually speaking, they can do it both virtually and in person.
Is there a cutoff or anything like that?
There is a cutoff. For the virtual testimony, you have to sign up by 3:30 of the day of the meeting, so they have a little bit of a early cutoff point, so you can't do it right up to the meeting. But if you show up in person, they claim that they have a 5:30 cutoff time for speaker slips, because you have to fill out a speaker slip. I don't know if they take speaker slips that for people who arrive after that, but just so people know that that is the statement that they have on their website. So if you show up too late, you might not have a chance to speak if you chose to.
Okay, and you've got about 2 minutes and 30 seconds to speak.
You have 2 minutes and 15 seconds.
15.
The 15 seconds is slated for you to introduce yourself, and then the 2 minutes is supposed to be the content.
Right, so they want you to say your name and spell it and so forth.
Correct, for the record.
Which is, up to them. Okay, it's not like they don't have your name been spelled or on your ticket or otherwise, but yes, okay.
Right, and for the listening audience, I guess they claim that as well.
Okay, so what I'm trying to say is, if you've got something to say and you've got a friend who's got something to say, you may want to coordinate with that person so that you're using your full 2 minutes to the as best you can.
Absolutely, and I think what people are not taking full advantage of is that this is the forum where you can get your message heard very, solidly to everybody that's there. I mean, so all of the things that you might be talking about at your school level that are really bothersome or problematic, this is a place to bring those. All those other discussions don't mean anything unless you come before this decision-making group of people.
Right, because, so the directors are the ones who are making the decision, and this is your democratic chance to put your message in front of them.
Yes, and this is policy and procedure. So these are the things that will stick.
Okay.
These are the things that people are going to use as anchors and springboards for very important work. So when there's a lot of buzzwords floating around, and those are real great and helpful. But when it comes to what do those concepts look like, the policy is what guides the actions and the decision making. So you need to make sure, as a person who has any kind of input on these, that you are getting that thoughtfulness out to the board.
Okay, so let's just talk about policy here, because I think the first concept that's really important to understand is the superintendent in a well-run school district is supposed to be the person running the day-to-day operations, and then the school board is not supposed to be interfering with the day-to-day operations. They're supposed to be creating the policy, and the superintendent is supposed to be executing the policy, and the board then reviews the superintendent's performance on executing their policy.
Yes, and I would also add that I think, and maybe it's known already or assumed to be known, but the board members represent the constituents. So if there is not something in there that has been, if administration has tried to be evasive about a particular topic, you need to bring it to the board member. They're the ones who are supposed to be asking the tough questions on basis, for the students and the families that they represent, and pushing back if that's so needed. So they're really the vehicle and supposed to be, the checks and balances that happens between the administration, the superintendent, and the people they serve.
Okay, so let's try to talk about some good ways to influence that policy, right? So they're human beings, they're elected officials, and they're also part of the bureaucracy. So I think we need to keep all those factors and probably many more in mind.
Yeah.
But you know, there's because what policy is supposed to do, and I guess we're going to say um, there's a policy should set out a structure and explain to the administration how they're supposed to deal on a certain issue, right? But at the same time, it should also communicate to parents what they can expect will happen on a certain issue, right? And this is extremely important here with bullying because I think it's very important for both accountability, but also because bullying is one of those red line issues sometimes that when a parents reach out to administration, some action needs to happen. It needs to be documented.
Right.
Right. And so this is one of those things where a policy that's going to work well in this situation is going to give the parents the opportunity to complain. It's going to have intervention happen if necessary, and whatever the accusation and whatever the outcome of the the resolution, that's going to be documented. It might not be shared with the world, but at least it's going to be documented so that there's a track record. We can look back, hold students accountable if need be, hold administration accountable if need be, and that everybody's got sort of metrics there that they can understand, and so that the school board can have an understanding and have an accurate understanding of what's going on.
Correct. It's like, the rules of the game, if you would. Like, putting those forth so that everybody who is involved knows exactly what is going to be taking place at any given time. What are the big ideas in the policy? What do we stand for? What are we etching out? And then correspondingly, every good policy should have administrative procedure, which we'll get into a little bit as well. Those are what can people expect if they have to go into this policy and utilize it. What happens first? What happens next? It's all in the vein of transparency and building towards a collaborative resolution for everybody.
Right. So keeping that in mind, we could say a bad policy is going to be something that's going to involve filing a complaint, having the complaint go into a black box, and then not being aware of the outcome.
Yeah, and so when people read through these policies, I would ask them to read with a very critical eye on, do they feel like the way these are written, are they restorative in nature or are they punitive in nature?
Okay.
How are they working towards resolution and transparency? So as I look through the procedural piece, I can see that it's making strides toward that because they're not withholding information, at least the way that it's written. They don't want to withhold information from all parties. Usually victims are very much at a deficit because they don't have the knowledge of the procedural, they don't get access to investigations that are going on and what's happening, so they are completely in the dark many times as to what is even going on.
Right, and there's pupil confidentiality, there's all
Yes.
sorts of layers of things where even, rightful or wrong is going to put them in a position of just not knowing what's happening.
Right, and
Right.
those things could all be going on, but the victim would have no idea of that
Right.
because then they're not even communicated that. So
that's a transparency lens, right?
Yes.
Can you say more about what you were talking about, a restorative, lens, to use Mr. Yagman's word, right?
yeah, so like if we are thinking about not jumping right to the punitive. So you'll notice in some of these, I have noticed it in this policy. So they will say things like, they don't want to call the police first. They want to bring in an administrator to do some investigation within a certain time frame.
Okay.
And they want to protect all parties involved. So they talk about the very specific communication and the way they document that communication. And even their word choice in this policy is showing me that they're being very cautious about, so let's say there's a chance that some bullying could be happening and it's really not bullying.
Right.
Maybe the aggressor is not, they don't want to turn that person into a victim either if that person doesn't deserve to have that. They want to complete the cycle first, so they're being very cautious in the way that they are labeling what's happening, but they do have steps to go through so that, and now everybody can see them about how they're investigating this procedure.
And maybe I can step back and look at it from a parent lens here. if just going to imagine, the worst bullying ever has happened to my child. I come to an administrator and basically I say, I want that child. I'm going to say fired because I'm coming in it from an employment context, but I mean expelled. The worst thing ever to happen to that
Yeah.
child. Okay, now stepping back, I think I realize that it's as a parent, I'm obviously biased, and it also as I'm not in the position to be making that kind of choice,
Right.
right? And informed, and I don't have all that background and
True.
the necessary information to to
You
go
have
through
the
that.
perspective of your child, most likely.
Right, but at the same time, I'm going to need to know that there are steps being taken to address this situation, right? So and I think that that's oftentimes the greatest disconnect between the parental point of view and the administrative point of view, which is something needs to at least be done so that if it's happening again, either to my child or somebody else's child, that we're not starting over from the ground zero. And at the same time, the administration has to be able to maybe it's not a criminal situation. Maybe it's not a bullying situation.
Right. You don't jump to call the police right away. They even have that in there. Like
Right.
our first action is not to bring in and get anybody in trouble until we know what's going on here.
Absolutely, but and I think that's sort of bringing us into the greater point is, because we're talking about public policy. This is a democratic local control issue. Okay, so part of what we're advocating here is that people go and tell their school board directors what a Milwaukee public policy for school bullying should look like. Okay,
Yeah.
and so that's you're the people who can explain that to the directors what that would look like. Okay, so then
Yes, they can.
I think to step back from that, from another sort of, what could I bring if I was going to bring, something to the school board? Obviously, I think some examples of bullying not being responded to is something that should be addressed, right? Because if there's a policy is going to be able to address the extreme situations and the minor situations, and hopefully everything in between. So an extreme situation is usually a good way to test out how this policy is going to work, right?
Yes, it is.
Another kind of situations are extreme reactions by administration or extreme inaction, by administration,
Right.
So because I think that's sort of part of the issue here is, we all know that we can all understand that the pupils, may be victims, they may be bullies, they may be both, right? But one of the people who we know are supposed to be doing something and are supposed to be professionals here is the administration.
Correct. And I think too, another piece to add to this, as people look at these policies, these are things that you can ask for in open records. So you can see the names of certain steps. So you can call a certain report by name and you can ask for that for your child so that you have that information. It's very useful that way, I've noticed. And it's also important for the district, and in this case, because we're looking at Milwaukee Public Schools, we have up on the screen, to make sure that when the district, if the district would ever have to produce something that has been requested, that what they produce matches both what was supposed to take place and the other versions of events. So what we shouldn't see is one set of narrative or witness account or admin account, and then when you go to the written documented portion of it, there's a extreme difference there.
So maybe
So-
I can lay that out because I've seen situations here where the witness reports, even the statements from pupils, everybody's describing to what I see as a pretty big fight. Okay, and then but the administration's description of it is again like student lunches, like, carrot medallions. It says playful. It was a playful incident.
Right. They minimize, right, where there's a big discrepancy between the way everybody that was there perceived it and how it managed to make its way onto paper, which by that time it turned into, oh, this was just kids goofing around. And then you can even go back and look in the paperwork, and maybe they didn't think they were playing around in their first versions of things.
Right.
But then that report morphed.
So that, because I think there's a lot of pressures, and I think we can, all sorts of MPS stakeholders from all sorts of lenses will know that administrators have a lot of different pressure. For example, because of the new disproportionality push, there's a big pressure just to not report anything, right? There's all sorts
That's
of
true.
pressures on to have their school particularly look good, and numbers issues and things. There's all sorts of incentives for them to report, not to report, and everything sort of in between, and to handle things differently.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why a policy here that's going to describe on your school, any school, your child's school, that's going to be able to describe what should happen and what needs to happen.
Yes.
Because I can say, from my experience, I went to a parent-teacher conference with a child, and that child reported an incident of bullying. And when I asked the teacher and the guidance counselor, who was both required by the policy there, what had they done with her report of bullying, they invited me to go fill out a form. And I was really clear with them that that wasn't what the policy required, because, my child is a person who can report bullying, and it doesn't have to be in writing.
Yeah, so, right, they can complete and execute with everything that they have. They don't need to make another hoop for somebody to jump through in order to encourage them to go and execute what they're supposed to be doing anyways. Right, they don't, I think sometimes they make the parent or the whomever, go through all these extra steps because they know that will exhaust the parent. Many parents, I'm not going to fill out another form.
Right.
It wasn't a big deal, was it, Marcus? And so you just, you wind up scratching it off. But
well, and because we've seen that now, thanks to Adria Magdaleni, that there is the official policy, but then there's also this secret policy document that only some people get to see, and that's informing sort of what's going on back there. And I think, we've seen that specifically MPS, there's one thing that they're telling parents, and then there's another thing that the administrators are told to do in writing.
Right, and Adria's comments were, I wouldn't accept this if I was a board member. Well, we're going to adopt this now, and we'll, kind of make up the rest later. So that's kind of sneaky. It's like a bait and switch, because they're putting something forward, and it has not been, the specifications aren't there. So people don't even really know, because they don't exist. How could they know what's going to be in there and what people are going to be executing? And the other piece is MPS often doesn't do that other part. So, Adria, even made mention of, well, our handbook is only 56 pages long, or 36 pages, or
Right.
something like that. And you want to say, well, how is that working for you?
Right.
Because you have a lot of issues in your policy and handbook. That's a big part of your legal work. So, I think getting more specific would help you to avoid some of that.
Well, so I try to pull back here again themes so that we can give advice here for people that are speaking, and then we'll go into look at the policy itself. I think this, a good policy is going to be something that holds everybody accountable.
Yes.
Right. That's can be universally applied, and that it's going to be sort of Milwaukee focused. Right, and that,
yes.
Which is going to really mean, at least what I take that to mean here, is going to address the Milwaukee specific, the problems that are ongoing here, and try to restore. When we're talking about restorative justice, we also need to talk about restorative policies here to fix what's going on with how they've been doing things behind the scenes, right? So,
Exactly.
and I guess that goes back again to accountability here, but uh, and I heard this used recently, and I think it's a bad metaphor here, but we're sort of in that period where we'd like to trust, but we need to verify first.
Yeah, I think most people feel that way now. Somewhere along the line, there hasn't been a lot of checks and balances. So I think it's important that all of us do some checking and balancing.
Right. Okay. So, and I mean, I think that's our message on how you can add some democratic input here to that. Let's see what we can
We can
do
take
here.
a quick look at these. This is policy 8.52, which will be on Tuesday's agenda. It is specific to student bullying. You'll notice the document has what we call redlining in it, and strike through. So you'll be able to identify where changes of language from the previous policy were and what is new language being proposed, which is in the red. So
I know you have some things that you were excited about. The one thing that stood out to me is that now it seems like there is a student bullying policy that's different from the general bullying policy. Is that right?
well, that's what I'm assuming because they've indicated student here. I have not seen a new corresponding bullying policy with employee or adult or anything, but the fact that they are doing this here indicates to me that they will most likely be updating the employees handbook as well.
Okay, because the DPI and the statutes in Wisconsin here require them to have a bullying policy for all bullying incidents, and that is not just limited to student bullying. So let's hope this is not just going to be shifting the blame sort of off of, bullying by security guards is unacceptable according to the state of Wisconsin, right? Bullying by teachers of other teachers is unacceptable. Bullying of parents by principal is unacceptable.
That is accurate, and it's not outrageous to know that kind of thing needs to be in place.
Because I can tell everybody here that I have personally filed a bullying complaint here with the school board of a district administrator assaulting another district employee, bullying, and I have not heard anything about that. No response from them whatsoever. That's been several months. I mean, that was November, I think. They certainly have not followed their policy with regard to that bullying incident. Bob Peterson, where are you?
Yeah. So if we go back into this student bullying policy, I do notice that they've been very specific with the definitions that they're calling out. So they're making sure all users of it have a calibrated sense of what definitions they're operating from. They also give very specific examples of what some of those bullying behaviors can be, which is very important. I've noticed they've included information about social media and the power balances, just really kind of dissecting and growing a little bit of those previous definitions to be broader and yet more specific too.
That is fairly interesting here. They've changed it from often involves a power imbalance to occurs when a student uses an imbalance of power. So here they're defining it straight up as an imbalance of power, and I mean I think that probably fits.
I think to me it definitely fits, and it will be very important for them to be self-reflective of their administration there about the imbalance of power and how bullying is a very very connected to that.
Right. Well, because they've taken out, or their proposal is to take out references to age, national origin, race, ethnicity, religion, things like that, which may be appropriate here. It may be now. We'll see if they've got that addressed in other issues. I mean, I like how it's a more universal definition.
Well, they have indicated discrimination categories there, so, in this bullying policy, so I'm not sure what that means, but,
Okay, well,
that is unique to see there.
yeah, and we'll keep an eye on. I mean, I've seen a lot of other bullying policies for a lot of districts. This seems particularly unique, but so
Because
far,
it doesn't have to be, you know, and I often wonder too that, I'm sorry, that doesn't include anything about an individual's, like, I'm just gonna give an example here. Somebody's weight or size. Um, is that included? Like, could somebody get bullied over that overtime? If you take all the other factors, I don't see that in there. And I know that weight is not a protected class, so I don't know if that's why it's not included in there, but just something to
right? Well,
question.
and bullying certainly encompasses a concept greater than protected class discrimination.
Exactly, that's my point.
Right,
Right,
and
so
that is absolutely rightful, right? But
I think so, but I'm hoping they don't X somebody out because they're just going on those categories.
And-
It's kind of my thinking.
right, so that's we have that theory in law which says that if you include some things, that implies that you're excluding other things.
And that's what I'm wondering.
Right, so and it seems like they're trying to get rid of that problem by having a broader definition, but then at the same time, that becomes more ambiguous, and that seems to be something that MPS is not thriving with.
Right, they do not do well with make it up as you go.
No. Or, you know,
Or they are very good at it, but
right.
yeah. So yeah.
Well, let's
If
say
we can avoid that, for me, I think everybody involved would prefer to avoid that kind of scenario.
for pupil-centered outcomes.
Yes.
Okay, right.
Yes.
For management-centered outcomes, maybe a different thing.
Well,
Okay.
I'd rather just know the rules of the game right off the bat.
So there is a limit to taking out spreading of rumors. I mean, I think social exclusion, isolation, using technology in a hurtful manner, cyberbullying, etc. I mean, other references between students, adults. See, there's an administrative policy for bullying involving employees. Okay, and so that'll be interesting to see that. We'll have to reference that. That's troublesome to me. And the main thing that's troublesome to me about that is this. I assume this is going to be a document that's going to go to students. And I don't want the message to students to be that the bullying doesn't occur if it's done by it only occurs if it's done by students.
Right, like that this policy only limits a student to making a concern known if it's student to student.
Because the students certainly don't get the administrative policy.
Right.
Right, so they're not going to know that there's this bullying issue or rule for employee against employee.
They won't. And this is a good point. I don't want to lose it here. I don't even know if students get any of these policies, quite frankly. I mean, I think they're referenced in the rights and responsibilities book, but this is one policy that somehow, you know, for me, depending on what grade the student's in, there should be discussion about these things happening in school communities with the parents, with
yeah.
and I don't think that
No.
that's happening.
Okay.
So, you know, no wonder most of the time people don't even know that these exist.
But-
they don't find them until there's been a situation and they have to go and overlay the policy over what happened already.
I'm sure there's not a link in some sense, but you know.
I'm sure they put it out
Yeah.
through their, you know, they checked a box and say, yeah, we told them, look, it's in this newsletter. But I think going more so with it, and it would be a great place for when we're talking about restorative practices, when we're talking about circle or morning meetings, I see that being referenced a lot. Self-regulation strategies, I heard that in a meeting.
But this,
Working this into those pieces.
I'm sorry, I cut you off there.
No, that's okay.
I'm looking here just right above prohibition, and this is what I guess was always sort of sneaking in the back of my mind. They from the get-go, they're defining bullying as something that could happen between student and student, student and adult, or adult and adult. Well, that's missing a pretty big category here that I certainly experience bullying from, which is how about adult to student?
Yes. Yes.
That category isn't possible. Is that just called discipline in
You
their
know,
mind, or like what planet are they coming from that's not going on? Because certainly the state statute recognizes that, and
that's huge. That's so big that I definitely want to make
you
a
know,
note
some
of it.
people call it normative behavior, and other people call it bullying.
Right. Or they call it, I'm the teacher, you're the kid.
Deal with it,
Yeah,
right?
so that's very important. And we don't want to hear your drama.
We don't want to hear. Well, I mean, so that was.
Heard that.
Let me put it this way: as if I was a high school student and I got that language there that says it explicitly includes bullying, but doesn't it excludes it from the teacher to the student, that message would be loud and clear to me, right? I mean, these MPS students aren't stupid. Right,
Agreed.
high school students would easily be. Middle school students would understand that means that teachers can do whatever they want.
And we don't want to hear from you
That's the message.
on that particular thing.
That's the message.
And if we
yeah.
go into our policy notice, it doesn't say that.
Right.
So go find yourself another bullying situation. I mean, yeah, they wanna get rid of that particular category. Perhaps I think it's important to bring that to their attention.
Well, and part of that thing is because bullying encompasses a larger concept than discrimination, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, is there anything else in here that we should be drawing our attention to?
Well, I mean, we could go on, and I do think, I haven't analyzed this fully, but I am encouraging people to go in knowing how to do the comparison from the previous version to this version, especially educators, especially students, especially families and parents. What is missing? You know, they can email us. They can, you know, if they don't want to do it, I can speak on their behalf, or I can put the message forward. But I encourage those people to reach out right directly to the board.
So this is something I think that this is good. This is some sanctions and support here, where before it said the district may take disciplinary action up to and including suspension and et cetera, you know, punitive. Now it says the administrator shall make attempts to use disciplinary alternatives for students who engage in bullying or who retaliate against a student who reports a bullying incident. So again, this is only focused on students, but it puts a positive duty on the administrator to make attempts to use disciplinary alternatives. So I'd like to see it added to say make attempts and document those attempts. But otherwise, I think that's a fairly good. I mean, it puts a positive duty on them to do something, and I absolutely agree that we should not be calling the police at the beginning. Milwaukee parents don't want that, and there's times when that's appropriate, but I think that the administrators should be able to have some flexibility there.
And this fits nicely with the multi-tiered system of support that Milwaukee Public Schools is in the middle of, revamping. So that's, right there is a connection that people may or may not realize. So exactly what you just said.
So there's something here, and they've changed this word will to shall.
I've noticed that too.
And so that's sort of, so what's interesting about that is shall is like an older version, and the more modern one is will. Okay? And so this may be one of those examples of human rights to human relations to talent management to whatever, that just sort of the same thing with the new outfit on. Same pig, new lipstick, right?
Well, and I noticed in the policies, or the procedure, that they weren't consistent all the way through. So sometimes it's a will. They went out of their way to change it to a shall, and then other times they changed a shall to a will. So I really started to wonder, does MPS have something that they're doing with the definitions of will and shall that are specific, or are they just missing this? This comparison.
Right. Well, and there's I don't know if it's a clue, because it's fair to say that you can't, we're just reading tea leaves, and it's hard to hold them to, they don't seem to know exactly what they're doing here when they're saying will and shall, but that would be my question. Because in here, for example, it does say Office of Human Capital is now changed to Office of Human Resources, right? So is that carrot medallions or is that something real? And so that's the question I would be asking to Posley here is what does shall mean to you, Mr. Posley?
And because they went out of their way to change it.
Right.
They had discussion about that. And then when you go look at the secondary document.
So you would presume either that because they've done that or because they've watched this channel that they'll be ready to answer that question on Tuesday.
Maybe, you never know.
Okay.
Maybe a person or two might be.
All right. You know, because as opposed to let's vote on it now and we'll get you the answer to it.
Right, let's just get it done now and
Okay.
we'll tell the people we'll fix it later, and if we do, we do. If we don't, they will never know. They'll
Okay.
never know.
So here it might be one of these ones. It says the school district will also take, but now it says will take appropriate action. It didn't go to shall. But it says the administrator must take steps to promote safety for all parties involved, including the student who engages in bullying behavior, etc. Okay, and so that's super important here. But again, I would say take steps and notify. Those two concepts need to be linked here, I think, wherever possible.
And they need to standardize, this would be another piece of feedback that I give them.
And I'm sorry,
Oh,
not
no, I'm
notify
sorry.
documents.
Okay.
Right, because notify, sometimes it's appropriate to tell people the outcome of bullying situations. Sometimes it's not appropriate to tell them the outcome, but it should always be appropriate to say that we've investigated it and to document the investigation. Right?
Well
I mean,
said.
yeah, I think
Yes,
that's
an
the
important distinction right
between
there.
parent and guardian. You know,
Absolutely.
yeah. Right. Okay.
And then I was just gonna say too that the reporting templates that they use quite a bit in here, I think it would be wise for them to consider, you know, having a standardized reporting template, because what you'll do with everybody makes their own reporting
Oh,
template.
for sure.
You're gonna have
Exactly.
different pieces of information, then you're not gonna have like the data points that you need to, you know, establish when a school does a certain thing and when they do not. So I guess that would be another piece of
You
feedback.
know, be
I would
really
give.
good for that.
What?
A Google document.
Oh yeah. Well, I know they can do that.
They can do. They have that power. Okay.
Maybe it's there already.
It's the $6 million document. Okay. Yeah. So that's. I mean, I think it's fair to say that we're just scratching the surface here, but we're trying to give you a model here for looking at this, interpreting it, and going back to that thing of accountability, documentation, and Milwaukee focused, so that we can, really give some democratic input to the school directors, and so that they can be held accountable to that input.
Yes, and the input needs to come from us now. Like, talking about it after the fact makes it that much more difficult to go back and rework things. So I guess just really drawing people's attention to these are the kinds of things that people need to be putting their input on.
Right, because for better or for worse, the time to do it is now, which is much better than after a child has been bullied and they failed.
Right. Yeah, we would prefer to not have that situation happen so often.
All right. Well, that's not a positive note that we're ending on, but
Well, wait, we're not going to end yet. Just do one more flash, because what I
Awesome.
want to show on this particular tab
uh-huh.
is really quickly. We're not going to go through this, but what I want to point out to people is that MPS has had the bullying policy in place for many years, but they have never had administrative procedure. And so I want to draw your attention to this administrative procedure. That's why the entire thing is in red.
Can you just explain where this document comes from?
So this document is going before the board on the same day the policy is going through. So they're putting forth the policy, and this is kudos to MPS for doing this. I love it, and they should do it actually every time they have policy, which is.
And just explain the difference now, because I think it's being clear. It's dawning on me, but
So
yeah.
policy are the big ideas, the definitions. It's kind of like the values and where they are prioritizing their ideas around bullying. And then the administrative procedure is actually the step-by-step process or procedure that is supposed to be enacted anytime certain factors of bullying are in place. So you'll see when you look through this, it'll say, this has to happen in this amount of time by this person to these people. They get into the nitty gritty of how you now implement like anything associated with a policy violation that may have occurred with the bullying policy.
So this is really the rules.
These are the rules.
How the administration implements the policy.
That's what this is. And so
Okay.
you don't usually, some people may not even realize the difference between policy and administrative procedure. And you should really not have policy without administrative procedure. But in Milwaukee Public Schools, we have had that gap on many things. So this is a good step forward.
But okay, and I think one way to look at that is the policy, whatever the words in the policy are, the administrators are not going to be asked to interpret the language that's in those policies. They're going to be asked to follow the steps in the administrative procedure.
The administrative procedure must be followed. Yes. So
Okay.
you're right. That is where, because again, if there's an incident of bullying that needs to be followed up on, they're going to go to the procedures and see, what do I do? I mean, it even gets into a 24-hour notice time frame. If this
So I'll just read here. So for example, responding to a report, it says, the administrator shall contact the parent or guardian of the victim at the end of the first day of receiving a report of bullying to inform them of what is being alleged and the current rate of investigation. So as a parent, if you've got the administrative procedure on any given issue, you're able to then go back to that principal and say, did you tell me at the end of the day or something else?
Yes, and this is a great tool because the principal can say, this is often what's so unsettling for victims. They don't know what's going on.
Right.
The administrator can say, hey, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and follow this administrative procedure as it is district procedure and policy. So, but I'm going to give you a copy. Here's a copy, you know exactly what's going on. And if any time you feel like something isn't on point, then please feel free to reach out and we'll let you know where we are in the process. This would end so much unknownness for people on the receiving end or even participating. I like how MPS has in this part made very specific directions about where documentation should occur and whether the student is the aggressor or whether they're the victim. Mm-hmm. They have identified some different practices there, and I think that's a very good step forward. So I like what I see here. I have not gone through it all the way from start to finish with a fine-tooth comb, but even the spirit of it is much more transparent, it's much more restorative, and I really would love if parents would take a look at it and see what else is missing.
Well, this is for lack of a better word, the real meat and potatoes here.
Yes, it is.
So for some reason, they decided to come up with this document, and then they're sort of changing the policy language to sort of mirror this and to correct a few typos and things like that. But
and that's
really,
why the two of them are so important.
Right,
because
okay.
like if you don't know how to do it, then your policy is something that you're really, it's just kind of a, red herring or whatever. It's just words on paper. So,
well, one thing, I mean, if the board is really taking this seriously, and that's what this means, the development of this document.
To me, this is a great sign of them taking note.
Well, and this is because the administration would have had to spend. I mean, this is a serious document this is a work compared to what they have normally produced.
Absolutely.
Right? Because
this is significant.
That's the word I'm looking for. Because if, for example, this had existed with another issue that we've been looking at, which is a remote work policy, that issue would have been done.
And that is the absolute best parallel that I could say. Usually MPS does a one-pager policy that's very ambiguous and undefined and not specific. And then, as they were saying to the board, well, we'll get to this part someday. And guess what? They usually never get to this part, or they only get to this part when so many difficulties and challenges have arisen that they're in a legal, hard spot, that then they go and they make policy.
Reactively
policy, and the policy isn't normally reflective of the original spirit of what was supposed to be happening there. It's more of a, we better CYA, and
right.
Let's put some procedures in here that kind of protect us a little bit more as an institution. So I love this. It's coming out. Should have been done years ago. They had bullying policy years ago. But let's forget that from a restorative lens. They have it now. And so our goal is going to be to get people training on it, get people aware of it, and get families and students aware and community aware of how this is part of the bigger picture.
Okay, and because I just want to add one other, story from that I can say about how knowledge is power at MPS. When I was a student at Morse Middle School, I had access to this book of all of the punishments that were available for all of the known infractions at the time. Okay, so there was
Okay.
a list of all the things that students could get in trouble
It was
for.
probably a matrix.
And this was typed up, so this was before they did matrices. But yeah, and the maximum minimum. Do you know what kind of power I had at that school? Because I just say, teacher, you can't do that.
Right. Yeah, go back and refer to line whatever. The maximum is, and that's the way it should be. I mean, they should not, that's the power balance that we're talking about though.
Exactly,
You
because
shouldn't be guessing
you shouldn't be guessing.
what's you need to know, that's how people self-regulate.
In a public environment, there shouldn't be secret rules.
There
Right.
should not be.
For this kind of activity, there should not be secret. For bullying, for reporting of bullying, for things that are this important and this immediate. Okay, and again, under the restorative, we do appreciate that they're actually taking some steps. But the next step, if they can do this for bullying, they sure as heck can do it for remote work, for example.
They really need to go through, and I guess that would be my other piece. Before they continue to crank out resolutions, they need to prioritize going back and getting these kind of pieces in place for all the existing policy that has not yet been looked at closely and defined closely. That is work that should have been done, and it hasn't been done, and it needs to be done as a priority, and they really would benefit from that in many ways. And I urge them to do some kind of assessment to find out where are all of their policies, when was the last time a policy was reviewed, what kind of administrative procedures do they have with it. If they don't have any, like in this case, you're going to need to start with a fully read document and get something adopted. And a student cannot self-regulate if they don't know what I keep using this term, but if they don't know what the rules of the game are. And it's cruel for us to tell a child to do those kinds of things, and then we change it up on them.
Right.
That's
let's say
psychologically
management.
not
Right.
nice.
Well, Posley thrives in ambiguity, but education doesn't. Right? I think that's what I took away from
And
what
that's
you just said.
Posleyism.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, and I just have to call it out from all of the things that I've read, that is the way that leader has chosen to, they enjoy and benefit from the imbalance of power, and they like to keep the imbalance of power. So we really are challenging that with him. I know I am, and I think other people need to work to get the balance evened out.
Right, so I think ultimately what we're saying here is, an MPS as it's currently constituted, without real firm rules that both the students, parents, and the administration know, is just a form of bullying.
It really is. Yeah, because we could pull the rug out right under you. And, I've got a team here who will write something up because it was ambiguous before, and will now make a new policy and overlay it onto you now in this situation. And guess what? When we do that, guess who the problem is? It's not us.
No.
It's you.
It's you.
You're the one.
And
we're going to call the police on you.
And some people, at the school system are not there because they want to be. Some people are dragged out of bed by the law and required to attend this, and that we have have the duty and the responsibility to not only educate them but protect them as well.
We absolutely do. And anybody who has that true feeling knows that what we're saying is the way that it needs to be. I don't know anybody who would argue for the other way, of keeping things broadly. And they certainly wouldn't do it in a public setting. they might do behind closed doors with a very few of their closest trusted yes men, but they would not do it anywhere in a public setting because it's not the way democracy works at all.
Right. Well, that's, I mean, just put it another way is, what if you're in math class and, sometimes 2 plus 2 is 4, but then some other times it's 5?
Yeah, that would confuse a person.
That would confuse a person.
And it might even over time, if it kept changing so many times, it would cause that person to be very confused. It would cause that person to not know how to respond in a normal way because they have that confusion. It seems as if the psychological games are playing, and they might even get agitated from time to time because they might get agitated a little bit if people keep switching all of the things around in different places every time that person tries to function in their game. So
right.
It's got to be horrible for students to not know.
Well, and right, and because
what's good on a good day, and am I going to get written up today?
Because if you put 2 plus 2 is 5 on the test, you find out what happens.
Yeah.
Right? But if you go back and say, how come you said it was 5 on this day?
Yeah.
Then all hell's going to break loose.
Well, and they might just take their highlighter and make a little line over and say, well, we looked at that and it was a 4, or whatever. What we'll make it be, and they'll erase it, or they'll take a highlighter and say, oh, that happened after the fact. There's any number of
it was a playful confrontation, right?
Ridiculous and absurd things that any rational person would obviously know was not truthful.
And we're having fun here, and I think this is probably a good way to end this. But it is what we're saying is true in the context of a math classroom. Thank you, Dr. Garcia Hoven. It's also applicable in the employment context. It's also applicable in the democratic context. Here, if the rules of the road can be changed at any time by this one party, nobody else has a chance except to just withdraw.
Yes. Or to just play along in the chaos forever, which isn't really very healthy for anybody.
We've seen both of those strategies.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem like they're working out for everybody.
So.
All right. Well, thanks for sticking with us.
Yes,
we'll keep you
we hope
informed.
to hear from you.